You are watching a Fact TV presentation of the town of Swanzey.
I probably don't need this, but I used to work for a guy that always said, at the end of a meeting, he'd say, well, two quick things before you go, two quick things. And they were never quick, and there was never two. It was always like, you always took long. But this is going to be quick because we want to get to the main event. If you haven't grabbed one of these yet, there's a publication back of the room that we got from Soak Up the Rain, and it's got ideas for fixing your driveway or doing things around your property that'll help stop runoff from going into the lake. And actually, Gail and Joe have already done one of the things on their driveway, and it works, the fire hose trick. So take a look at that. It's a good book. The other thing is, I am going to do a fertilizer workshop at the town beach on August 10th. And the difference is, it's not a bad thing to have a lawn at a lake. It's just how you manage it is the key. And this is an organic way to do it that doesn't have phosphorus. It's based on a fish-based fertilizer. There's no chemical fertilization at all. But the key is that it makes the soil alive. It activates the microbes in the soil, and it does some great things as far as a lot of lawns burnt up in the heat. My lawn didn't, and I really think it has to do with the type of management, the type of fertilizer that we use, and I'd love you to learn how to do it because I think it is good. When the microbes work, the water is going to end up going down instead of sheeting out towards the lake. So it does, you don't have to mechanically aerate your lawn. The microbes and the nematodes are going to do that for you. So anyway, August 10th at the town beach. It is at 9 o'clock in the morning. It has to be done in the morning, which I'll explain that day, but that's when you foliar feed any plant. The stomates are open in the morning. They're not open during the afternoon. So we're foliar feeding, but it also will feed the soil. So yeah, I hope to see you then. Thank you.
I want to say something about the Lake Host program. So the Lake Host program are volunteers who, and you've seen them all, sit at the boat launch, and they inspect boats for invasive plants and species. We've been very lucky that we don't have an invasive episode happening. It's rare, actually. But we could use some more volunteers. So if you volunteer, you get basically $14 an hour to read a book. You have to do a training video. If you're interested, there's a sign-up sheet. There are two sign-up sheets in the back. One says Lake Host, the other one says Swanzey Lake Protective Association. If you're interested in volunteering, if you could put down your name, phone number, and email address, Nancy Carlson, who is our point person for that, will get back to you and fill you in. Okay? And the other thing has to do, the third item has to do with the Swanzey Lake Protective Association Board, and Kathy will say something about that. And the final item is the bylaws of the association require members to approve the officers and current board members. And so I'll tell you who the board members are and the directors. So I'm the president. Nancy Carlson is the vice president in Lake Host Point. Jana Blake is our great secretary. Keith Crack is our treasurer, and the directors are Kirsten Kunick, Karen Redding, Gail McDonald, Ann Bedaw, Deb Johnson, and Kathy Bergstrom. So all in favor of the board, could you please say aye? Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. It's all yours. Laura Deemer from FB Environmental Associates are going to tell us what happened with the assessment plan.
Good morning. I am not Laura Deemer, but I'm going to introduce Laura after a couple of brief remarks. My name is Jason Cooper. I'm a planner at the Southwest Region Planning Commission. Thank you all for joining. It's great to see folks showing up to stay informed about the watershed. Spider on me. I'm meeting many of you for the first time, and for many others, I'm seeing you in person for the first time instead of through a screen, and I'm grateful for this opportunity for us to gather together in this space. I moved to the area last summer and subsequently jumped right into this project while I was very much still getting my bearings, and I owe a lot to our environmental consultants on the project, Laura Deemer and Christine Bunyan from Forest Bell Environmental, and our Swanzey Lake work group for their patience and their cooperation as I got up to speed. Developing the Swanzey Lake watershed-based management plan has been a collaborative effort from a great many individuals, but I would be remiss not to acknowledge several collaborators that I feel went above and beyond. Laura and Christine have been fantastic partners to work with, and their subject matter expertise has resulted in the development of an excellent plan that I'm excited to share with you all. The draft is currently being reviewed by the town, and next Friday we'll send it out to the work group and to the public for comment. Jeff Marcoux from New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services sat in on a great many work group meetings, and he was always a very helpful voice to have at the virtual table. Stefan Mehu and other staff from the town helped guide the development of the plan and offered key insight into a great number of sections. Bud Windsor, Kathy Bergstrom, and Nancy Carlson not only jointly win the attendance award for meeting participation, but they consistently asked excellent questions, which helped guide our discussion, and always with a smile to boot. And last but certainly not least, Jeff Lapid wins the MVP award of the Swanzey Lake Work Group for his exceptional drive and dedication shown to the lake and to fostering its protection for future generations. Thank you again to all. I think it's fair to say that the circumstances surrounding the development of the Swanzey Lake Watershed Management Plan were somewhat unexpected. Last July, as we are all aware, the lake suffered a serious flooding event that will likely have lasting effects for generations. This posed hurdles and questions to the development of the plan, and I want to commend Laura and Christine once again for their navigation of this added wrench. I want to additionally remind folks that this plan sets goals and benchmarks for Swanzey Lake's water quality, and it is not a flood mitigation guidebook. That being said, with effective and continued collaboration between the town, the SLPA, and property owners, implementation of projects outlined within the plan will help Swanzey Lake in its recovery from this event and will make it more resilient to future storms. This collaboration will be critical, however. SWRPC sees itself as a partner with you in these efforts, and we would look forward to working with you to source implementation funding. Before I hand things over to Laura, I want to make one more acknowledgement. Bill Stetson passed away this spring. Bill was a valued work group member and a community fixture. He gave much to Swanzey Lake and the SLPA. He served as lake host, and more importantly, he was a friend to all. I'd like to take a moment of silence to honor Bill. Thank you. Laura?
Great, thanks. So, as Jason said, this is the final public presentation for the Swanzey Lake Watershed Management Plan. I'm Laura, as you all know, so I'm a certified lake manager. I work as a senior project manager for FB Environmental Associates. Our office that I work out of is Dover, New Hampshire. So for the past 18 months, we've been developing a watershed management plan for Swanzey Lake. And so what you're seeing here, you can kind of think of that planning cycle as, you know, a cycle. You know, when we started this project, we were building public support, we were establishing the committee, we were starting to engage with stakeholders, and then we quickly moved into field surveys last summer into fall, and where we completed an inventory of the watershed. We ran some models, we completed a water quality analysis to try to define some of the problems and the issues that you're starting to deal with. And that effort helped to inform. Can people not hear me well? Is this any better? Thanks. I'm a little shorter than the last two that were up here. Thank you. So yeah, we use that information to inform the water quality goal and help draft the plan that Jason just said is now in the hands of the town before it gets sent out to the work group. And once we get comments back, we'll be finalizing the plan, which is the part of the cycle that I have outlined here in yellow. Once we have the plan finalized, then that opens up the door for federal funding. So through the state administers the funds. There is just one particular grant that I'll highlight here that's used quite frequently, but it's Clean Water Act Section 319 funds. Those pre-proposals will be due mid-September, so in a couple months. So Jason will be coordinating with Jeff and others through the association if you want to try to get in on this grant round cycle. So yeah, all very exciting. And generally, this planning cycle we try to do on a 10-year basis. That's what we've defined the time frame for this plan, with the thought being that after 10 years, you should really start this cycle over again. You should be re-engaging stakeholders and the committee, taking a look back through the watershed, reevaluating the things that were originally identified to see how much progress you've made, and maybe there's new issues that have come up 10 years from now, and just reassessing those goals and how successful you've been. So the map that you see up here is just a general base map of Swanzey Lake that you're all familiar with. The lake itself is just over 100 acres. The watershed itself is about 8 times that size, 874 acres. You're about 55-ish feet max depth, and because of the watershed size and how much water is coming in, Swanzey Lake is flushing about 1 to 1.5 times each year. So that means the full volume of the lake is flushing out at least once a year, if not up to sometimes 1.5, depending on how much rain you're getting. And then you have 2 primary tributaries that come into Swanzey Lake. Obviously, you're familiar with that, and one of them is obviously the wetland pond complex that's dammed by beaver activity that I know in the past has caused some water quality issues with dam breaching. So that's all addressed and discussed in the watershed management plan. So just high-level discussion of some of the water quality concerns that we have for Swanzey Lake. So the first is that Swanzey Lake does experience low oxygen in the deepest areas of the lake. During the most critical time of year in summer, when those aquatic organisms such as fish are trying to seek cooler, deep waters, but they also are unable to survive under low oxygen conditions. So that's where we start to see it be a little bit tricky later in summer, where that habitat in the lake for those more sensitive cold water fish species, their habitat is pretty limited. And so we want to try to avoid that, right, where their habitat is completely eliminated, where they don't have cool enough waters and enough oxygen to survive those couple critical months in the year. The other thing that we're concerned about with low oxygen is that it can release phosphorus from your bottom sediments, which can move up in the water column and can feed algae, cyanobacteria, can also stimulate excessive plant growth. So these are the things that we want to be aware of. So Swanzey has also seen an increase in aquatic plant growth over time, particularly looking at some of the trophic surveys that the lake has done over the last several decades. There's been some noticeable increases in plant growth, but then also the filamentous algae that like to attach to rocks and plants along the shoreline. So that is also an indication of some excess nutrient issues in the lake. So Swanzey Lake is not alone in this. This is a trend that we're seeing across the state, but Swanzey Lake is experiencing an increasing trend in connectivity, which is a surrogate measure for chloride. So that's coming from salt that's introduced through winter application, or it can come from water softening systems if it's going to septic and leach fields that ultimately go to groundwater. So even relatively small amounts of chloride to our freshwater systems are fairly disruptive to the sensitive organisms, and it can really alter food webs and degrade water quality. So it's something that we touch on in the plan, and it's something broadly that most lakes across the state are seeing a significant increasing trend in this. And then finally, more recently, Swanzey Lake has been experiencing cyanobacteria blooms. So right now, these blooms don't appear to be regular or consistent pattern. Your last one was associated with that beaver dam breach, but the fact that they are happening is, a sign that we need to pay attention. So Jason touched on this a minute ago, but a major concern through the development of this watershed management plan that relates to Swanzey's water quality is really the aftermath of the severe storms and flash floods from last summer. So that caused a massive amount of nutrient-laden sediment and organic material to wash into Swanzey Lake. We observed in the oxygen data that was collected last summer that immediately following that storm event, the oxygen depletion in the deepest parts of the lake was more severe last summer than it's been measured in previous years. So the concern was, and still is, that that extreme event may have set Swanzey Lake on a new water quality trajectory. So a lot of the recommendations that we have in the plan is emphasizing that it's going to be really critical to try to assess and estimate what those changes in water quality are to Swanzey Lake because of that massive event, and because of this new material that's been introduced to the lake in a very short amount of time that might be depleting oxygen more rapidly than historic. And it's not just examples of extreme events that happened in 2023 that are threatening water quality. Many of our activities in and around the lake contribute to excess of phosphorus in lakes than would otherwise naturally be there. So this excess phosphorus loading can come from watershed sources, whether it's construction or development, agriculture, which is obviously not relevant to you guys, but fertilizers, logging, septic systems, shoreline erosion. That cyanobacteria can use this extra phosphorus to grow rapidly and form blooms, causing water quality degradation that not only impedes recreation, but poses serious health concerns to humans and pets and wildlife that may come in contact with the water. And that phosphorus that's coming from the watershed and settling on the lake bottom, like I said before, under low oxygen conditions, it can be released back up into the water column, and we call that internal loading. And when that internal loading becomes too high, it can have a positive feedback on bloom forming processes that can degrade water quality. So these images are just some lakes, one's in Maine, two in New Hampshire, that have seen some really severe and persistent recurrent cyanobacteria blooms over the last several years. What we're seeing across not only New Hampshire but in New England are that these lakes are starting to hit their tipping points, particularly within the last 5 years. Each of these lakes that you see up here, and these are just a few examples, they experienced relatively good water quality up until their first major bloom year, and then they've suffered recurrent cyanobacteria blooms every year since then, where a huge portion of their recreational period in the summer was off limits for any water contact activities. So a lot of this is, you know, our activities on the landscape are introducing these nutrients, but then climate change is sort of compounding that and exacerbating that effect on our lakes. We really right now are in a new era with enhanced effects of climate change. Our lakes are changing at a rapid pace as temperatures warm, seasonal precipitation becomes less predictable, more erratic, and this gives potentially toxic cyanobacteria blooms the opportunity to become more frequent, even in our good quality, low nutrient lakes. So what this means is that keeping the status quo with watershed development is really no longer sustainable. Our lakes are hitting their tipping points. They're no longer able to assimilate the additional nutrients that we're adding to them without dire consequences. And if that doesn't convince you, with any sort of water quality decline, whether it's cyanobacteria blooms, whether it's invasive aquatic plants, there are numbers of studies out there that show clear correlations with subsequent water quality decline, property value decline with water quality decline. So that just means less tax revenue for the town, less value for sellers, and if you have people that are coming to rent your homes on the lake, they might not want to rent that if there's less, if the water quality isn't good enough. So that just means less people coming to the area and less economic value all around. So Jeff was able to quantify the Swanzey lakefront property tax revenue that's generated, which is about $637,000 annually, just Swanzey lakefront property taxes. So the studies out there show that water quality decline can reduce property value anywhere as low as 5%, but upwards of 40%. So if we take like a conservative 20%, that could mean at least $127,000 less in tax revenue to the town because of that. I think the most important point to make with all of that is I want to emphasize that it's far more cost effective to invest in preventative measures now than to pay for restoration in the future. To wait till you hit that tipping point and then you're in restoration mode and not, protection, preservation mode. Every effort that you spend now, every dollar you spend is going to go way farther than when you hit that tipping point and you're trying to reverse the clock. So just to get into some of the things that went into the watershed management plan, we did quantify the amount of phosphorus to the lake through a modeling exercise. So some of the sources of phosphorus to lake systems typically include internal loading, like I mentioned before, where phosphorus in bottom sediments are released to the water under low oxygen conditions. We have watershed runoff from different types of land use. We have phosphorus that can also be blown in as atmospheric dust, septic systems in groundwater flow, and waterfowl depositing their waste directly. So all that phosphorus accumulates in the lake and it feeds the cyanobacteria, the algae, the plants. So we ran the model and we came up with these estimates. Most of the load is coming from the watershed at 56%. The second highest source is coming from internal loading at 17%, followed very closely by septic systems at 16%, and then atmospheric and waterfowl are relatively minor. So, the management efforts that we're focusing on in the watershed management plan are really the watershed and shorefront development, trying to implement strategies on existing development, and also think about what future development might look like and reducing the impact from that. And then also keeping in mind the internal load at 17% is something to certainly keep an eye on. And I also want to emphasize that that 17% estimate largely came from data prior to last year's extreme storm event. So we've been talking with the association and the town to, think about trying to collect some more data this year or next year to reassess that value. Are you really at 17%, or is that value higher now? Another thing that we did was a build-out analysis. So while existing development is a significant source of phosphorus to Swanzey Lake, so is the threat of future development if it's not done in the most thoughtful way in regards to water quality. So we modeled the potential impact to water quality from future development, which I'll give results in the next slide. So with the build-out analysis, we're really looking at the full build-out potential. And so the full build-out is just this theoretical future condition that would represent a period of time when all the land that can be developed in the watershed is developed according to your current ordinance and land use regulations that you have now. So when we are putting information into the model, we are accounting for existing buildings, conserved land, water wetlands, hydric soil, steep slopes. We look at where you can't build, where it's already been built on, or the environmental conditions don't allow further building. And then the current zonings, we have to take into account setback distances from water features or property boundaries. And that all gets put into this model, and it lets us know how many more buildings could be built in the watershed and where they would likely occur. So the map that you see here is showing in the pink, shows you the buildable area in the watershed. It's all in one color because there's actually only one zone in the watershed, rural agricultural district. And that represents about 48% of the watershed, or 472 buildable acres. So results from that, we identified 86 existing primary structures in the watershed. This doesn't account for accessory buildings, and those are shown as black dots on the map. The model predicted potentially another 105 new buildings could be added to the watershed, and those are shown as red dots on the map. And we looked at, we're able to do what we call, it's called a time scope analysis in the model. What we do is we like to look at historically for the town, which again might not be specific to around Swanzey, but we only have the US Census data available for us. We look back 20, 30, and 50 years, growth rates for the town, and we project that forward under those three scenarios to say, okay, how fast could those 105 new buildings be built? The 50-year compound growth rate was the fastest growth rate, so it was suggesting by the end of the century, theoretically, those buildings could occur. Of course, please, this is a planning level exercise, right? There's so many variables that go into growth, and that's assuming that ordinances don't change at all, which is obviously not a realistic assumption. Of course, they're going to change over time. This is really just a planning tool that the towns can use to evaluate whether they need to look at some of their ordinances. Is this how we want the watershed to be built out? Should we make adjustments to protect water quality? And then we were able to take that information and plug it into the water quality model to say, how would 105 new buildings in the watershed affect the water quality of Swanzey Lake? And obviously it would increase the phosphorus load to the lake. And I think the key here is that the model was predicting at that point you would likely have 114 bloom days on average per year. So essentially the entire recreational season. So things to think about and how to build smartly. So the water quality goal for Swanzey Lake, this is like a high level goal, right? We want to be able to improve the water quality of Swanzey Lake so that it at least meets state water quality standards for the designated uses that the state applies to it. And then, at the same time, substantially reduce the likelihood of any harmful cyanobacteria blooms in the lake moving forward. So to accomplish that, we had two objectives. The first objective is really focused on the existing conditions, the existing development in the watershed. So that's reducing the phosphorus loading that is currently happening to Swanzey Lake. And we were estimating it needs to be reduced by at least 18%, or 12 kilograms per year, to meet a water quality condition that would meet state standards and reduce the risk of cyanobacteria blooms. At the same time, though, objective 2 is looking at future development, right? Your watershed is not static. Development might be slow or fast at certain times, but over the next 10 years, there is going to be somebody adding an addition or a new house coming in, or someone that was a seasonal cottage that then they're going to be there year-round. It's not a static, it's a dynamic environment. So it's trying to also prevent or offset phosphorus loading, at least in the next 10 years until you're looking at your plan again, from that future development, to at least maintain current conditions. So when we're looking at, okay, how do we achieve that goal? When we're looking at the first objective for reducing the existing phosphorus load, that's when we're looking at the watershed survey sites that we identified and some of the shoreline areas that I'll mention briefly in a minute, and septic systems as well. And then with objective 2, we're really looking at conservation efforts and ordinances and zoning changes for future development. So with the watershed survey, that was part of the field work that we did last year. When we do watershed surveys, we're trying to identify areas that are likely contributing a disproportionate amount of pollutants to surface waters, and that's because sediment can contain a mix of nutrients like phosphorus and other organic material that can be pushed into the lake and stimulate growth. When we did the watershed survey last year, we identified 39 sites. Most of the issues were road surface erosion, ditch erosion, some block culverts, some buffer clearings, and obviously some camp and beach runoff. As we mentioned before, it was a very unusual time to start a watershed management plan for Lake. We really had just started getting going, and then you had your massive event last July, and right when we were about to go out and do field work, and we pushed it a couple months so that things could somewhat recover then immediately afterwards, but it definitely made the survey challenging in the sense of we knew that what we were looking at was abnormal conditions. It certainly was highlighting some extreme vulnerabilities that you had under those intense rain events, but we had to adjust how we were looking at prioritizing those sites, knowing that once they were fixed under normal rain events, that they, would be contributing less phosphorus than they did under these intense conditions. So that wording, is all in our watershed management plan for you to review if you'd like. And then the shoreline survey, we always like to incorporate these into the watershed management plans because it's obviously helpful to do our drive or walking surveys for the water in the watershed, but then getting that on the water perspective when we're looking back at the shoreline around the lake to understand where there might be some vulnerabilities with erosion and runoff. So when we do our shoreline surveys, we're looking at 5 different metrics. We're looking at the buffer, any evidence of bare soil, any immediate shoreline erosion, and sometimes that's not anything that's coming necessarily from the watershed at that point, but it could even be natural things like ice damage, but it's still part of the evaluation. And then if there is a house on that property, how close are they to the shoreline? And then we also look at the general slope of the property. If it's very steep or very flat, that can also change how critical that property might be during a major rain event. Obviously, the steeper it is, the more runoff you're going to see from that property. So overall, we split it out into 2 different scores: a shoreline disturbance score that's looking at the buffer, the bare soil, and the shoreline erosion, and the average score for the lake was a 6. That's great. The ratings go from 3 to 12, so it can go as high as 12. Generally, our cutoff is 7, so if I guess 7 or above means that the majority of properties are having an impact on water quality. So the average property condition was a 6. So there's certainly some opportunities for folks to maybe address runoff, but on a broad scale, we were seeing that there were no major red flags or issues. I don't even think we had one property that scored in our high impact category. We were all in the low to medium impact, which is great. The shoreline vulnerability score goes from 1 to 6. Your average was 3.8. 4 is usually our cutoff, so you're kind of right at that tipping point, but that's based on homes that are close to the shoreline and the slope of the property. So generally you have steeper areas, right? So that ramped up the cost or the score. And the questions that you see up here are just to help landowners think about questions to ask yourself when you're looking at your property and how you can protect the lake. Do you have an adequate shoreline buffer? Are you fertilizing your lawn? How many trees do you have? Do you live on a steep hill? Do you have a beach? How close is your house to the water? Do you use salt at all? Just some questions to ask yourself, and maybe there's some opportunities for you to make some adjustments and help protect the water quality. So we also did a septic system inventory, mostly with the help of Jeff, looking up property records, and then a residential survey, which Jason will talk about next. Generally, for septic systems, the average lifespan is roughly around 25 years. So that's the number that we're thinking of when we're looking at the data and whether we see a septic permit that was before or after that 25-year mark. For the septic survey, we found that 59 houses are within that 250 feet of the shoreline. 36% of those had a septic system permit on file. The rest did not, which likely means they were installed prior to somewhere in the 80s when, or even early 90s when the state really formalized that process with the permittings. And so the ones that we did have septic system permits on, a little over half of those had septic systems newer than 25 years, which is great. 5% were installed prior to 1996. So, and just to reiterate again that with the modeling exercise, we're estimating that about 16% of the total phosphorus going into the lake is coming from septic systems. So it is an important topic to keep at the top of the mind on how we can work together to support people in maintaining their systems appropriately, getting them pumped out. But I'll go over that in just a few slides. But I'll hand it over to Jason, since SWRCP led the residential survey.
Great, yes. So SWRPC last summer developed the residential survey for three kind of primary reasons. One, to learn more about resident activities such as pesticide application that might be affecting water quality. Two, to learn more about septic systems in the watershed and how often they're being pumped, as Laura explained. And then three, also learning more about resident perception of the lake's water quality and whether property owners feel like more action is needed, as well as whether they need more guidance in that respect. So there are a few questions highlighted here, and the results are shown. Question 2, how do residents of this house use Swanzey Lake? The vast majority of respondents indicated that they swim, they boat, whether that's in a motorboat or on a kayak or a paddleboard, and many people fish as well. And as well for the survey, we had 42 total responses. Many of you are sitting in this room. Thank you for completing that. And 2/3 of respondents indicated that they wanted additional resources and technical assistance, which I thought was noteworthy. Question 3, what is your perception of water quality in Swanzey Lake? So less than 10% of respondents indicated that they thought the water quality was poor, but again, about 2/3 of folks indicated that they thought there was room for improvement in the lake's water quality, and just about 1/3 of respondents said that they thought the water quality was excellent. As far as the septic, kind of the septics questions, question 10, how old is the system? Or I guess this relates to more than just septics, but 90% of respondents indicated that they have septic systems, 10% said they have holding tanks, and thankfully 85% of respondents indicated that their systems have been pumped within the last 5 years. And again, most of these systems are within 40 years old, but about 10% might be older than 40 years. And question 11, again, how often is your system pumped out? Almost everybody is saying that within 5 years they're getting their systems pumped. Again, kind of going back to the property owner behavior, question 14 was asking what kind of treatments you use on your property. So about 50% of respondents indicated that they don't use any kind of fertilizer, nuisance weed control, insect control. But a good portion of respondents said that they do use some kind of pest control. That's a little less than 40% indicated that they do. And then about 15% and 10% respectively shared that they use either fertilizer or some other kind of weed control. And very few respondents indicated that they use road salt on their property. Back to you, Laura.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, so these last few slides are really kind of the meat of the watershed management plan that we put together. It's what we call the action plan. We have these 6 major categories that we like to group the action plan in. And so I'm going to just make some quick high-level examples that will be in the plan for each of these categories. So with water quality monitoring, I think the biggest thing is, trying to maybe rally some more volunteers to assist with that baseline monitoring and maybe expanding that effort for Swanzey Lake and the tributary monitoring. And again, just trying to emphasize that I think that at least 1 year of a little bit more of a robust sample collection is going to be important to reassess that internal phosphorus load because of the extreme weather you saw last year, and trying to assess how that's really impacted the lake so we can make some better management decisions for Swanzey Lake moving forward. Next up, watershed and shorefront BMPs. Like the modeling showed, most of the phosphorus load is coming from development in the watershed. So, and a lot of that comes down to the individual landowner, which, you know, arguably have the most power to make change and a positive impact on the water quality. And there's so many actions that property owners can take to minimize stormwater and erosion impact to water quality. And the two key elements that I like to group them in is slowing runoff. For slowing runoff is infiltration and filtration. So we really want to slow down that erosive power of stormwater so that we can allow the ground to soak up the water and trap any of those excess unwanted nutrients from getting to the lake. And landowners can do this by, you know, you can see here in these photos, either diverting runoff to rain gardens or other retention areas, stabilizing any shoreline access points or pathways, trying to maintain or enhance your vegetative buffer, and minimizing any use of chemicals or fertilizers, especially if you live right on the lake. There's so many resources available to you, which it sounds like there's some resources in the back for you to take home. That's great. You can go online either through the state, the DES, or UNH Extension. They have wonderful resources to walk you through simple things that you can do. You can also reach out to New Hampshire Lakes and have one of their technical people visit your property, walk through everything, and they'll point out things that, little things that you can do to make a big difference, and ultimately hopefully become Lake Smart certified in that process. So highly encourage folks to do that if you haven't already. With septic systems, again, which we've already touched on, but it's so important to regularly maintain your septic system, get it pumped out very regularly, at least 1 to 3 years, somewhere in there, depending on how much you're using the system, and get it inspected on a regular basis as well, maybe every 3 to 5 years. And I just want to emphasize too that the person who's pumping your system out and the person that would be inspecting it are two different people. So I know sometimes it seems like your septic pump out person is inspecting your system, and generally they are, but they're only looking at your septic tank, and they're only looking at it for like major clogging issues. A certified septic system inspector is a different individual who will do a more comprehensive evaluation of your septic system, and particularly your leach field, and do a small test pit to understand its full functioning capacity and whether you need to address anything. With road maintenance and training, that's a major one too, and that's for private landowners and also the town, depending on the ownership of those roads. So it's really understanding what those best practices are and implementing them, trying to control stormwater runoff and erosion from those roads, and making sure to minimize any salting or sanding as much as possible. And this municipal planning and conservation, so obviously this is geared towards the town, but conservation can be anyone. So we made some preliminary recommendations in the plan for updating ordinances and setbacks and other things related to that with a water quality protection focus. So it's something that SWR PC will likely be talking to the town a little bit more about what those recommendations actually mean, and maybe the town can start making some headway in updating those ordinances. And then obviously land conservation is the biggest thing you can do to protect the lake long term. If there's a chunk of land, especially a high value habitat, or an area that maybe has a high development potential, but it's completely forested now. Getting those parcels under conservation long-term is your biggest bang for the buck with protecting water quality for your lake. And then this is my last slide. Education and outreach is huge, right? I mean, this is part of what we're all doing here today, bringing that awareness and education to as many people as possible. So, you know, encourage you to share what you've learned with your neighbors and really help each other out, because you're all part of this community, and you know, you all have the same goal of trying to protect Swanzey Lake and all the beautiful natural resources that are surrounding it. So I thank you so much for letting us speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
What about the beaver ponds?
Yes.
Is that a major contributor to the phosphorus?
Yeah, so the beaver ponds, they obviously dam water and slow water, so that means nutrients and other types of things can settle out behind them. And so like what we saw with the beaver dam breach a few years ago was that it did send a pulse of nutrients to the lake that spurred a relatively short-lived cyanobacteria bloom. So it is something to think about, and I think that the biggest thing would be just to, and we have these recommendations in the plan, we have a section on beaver dams, but it's really trying to protect it so that you don't have a major breach like that down the road. You know, small, you know, minor, you know, phosphorus loads from there are fine, and obviously it's a natural feature. It's just it tends to concentrate over time. So when it's let loose with a breach, that's where you can get some issues. So so we provided some recommendations in the plan for that.
Where can we get, do you have this printed out, or is this available online, all your information?
So the draft watershed management plan is in the hands of the town right now. They have one more week to get comments back to us, and then it'll go out to the working group, and then Jeff will likely send it to the rest of the association.
Yeah, I would forward it to the group email.
I'll also post it on the Facebook page as well. Perfect.
Great, yeah. So we welcome any comments that you all have, and I think we're giving them maybe a 30-day comment period. So basically the month of August, you'll have time to make any comments, send our way, and we'll finalize it maybe early September. Yeah.
This is probably a stupid question, but, you know, years and years ago, they used to drop the level of the lake every 4 years, I think, every leap year. And then it was discouraged because it was considered not healthy. And I'm just thinking, you have all this extra sediment that's down there, and the lake is lowered. Is there a way to remove some of that extra sediment that's harboring the plants that we really don't want down there? You know, the additional ones that have contributed to, by the phosphorus and the storm and all that contribute to it? Or do you really just have to do other methods than that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, obviously to do any sort of dredging work, even minor,
Right.
you have to get a permit, and it's a major deal. But then on an ecological side, it's not great either. So I know that this was a lot of new material, right? An extreme event that went into the lake, so it seems unnatural, right? But it is there now, and now you've got the ecosystem that's trying to adapt to it, right? And so now going in, you're just redisturbing the system. And so when you're going in and you're scooping out that excess material, you're going to be stirring up things again. You're going to be making the water turbid again, even if it's temporarily, and reintroducing nutrients that you're obviously trying to get rid of by dredging. So it is a tricky balance. So the thought is, like, let it be, right? And then we can look at some management actions. Dredging is a management action in some cases. I really haven't seen it in New Hampshire lakes, and it's not something that I go to right away. And it also depends on the size of the water body, and I think Swanzey would kind of be borderline, maybe too big for an operation like that, so. Yeah.
I thought you said that you surveyed or you studied a few different properties on the lake for the water. Did you contact the owners at the time you did that, and did you give the results to the owners of what you found?
Yeah, so
Specifically?
so the shoreline survey that we did was by boat, and we surveyed every property. So we're about maybe 50 to 100 feet from the shoreline, and we just did a complete circle around the lake. Yeah, everybody got this, you know, obviously it's a quantitative score, but it's really based on qualitative assessment by the surveyor. So all that data is available. And the map will be in the plan. If you want to see your individual property, I'm sure that you can reach out to the association. I know that's been a discussion with the working group in the past. I think it can be really helpful information. But we also want to be sensitive to people's privacy. So it's not something that we disseminate on a map lot number basis so everyone can see everyone's score.
But it was done by boat, so you weren't able to see buffer areas as much as you might have been done on the property.
Yeah, so, right, you know, we can see as far into the buffer area as we can, but really we're most concerned with, you know, the first 100 feet, right, or as far back as we can see, but, you know, generally, if you can't see a house, that's a good thing, right? That means that you have a good buffer. And the low scoring that I showed you, right, the less than 7, means that there were, you know, most of the properties did have a good buffer, low bare soil, which is great. Yeah.
So like when you talk about fertilizer, I know the state record is only, I think you can't fertilize within a certain number of feet.
25 feet, yeah.
25 feet. Seems kind of a little. It doesn't seem like enough. So my question is there an organization, like is New Hampshire Lakes working with the state legislature? We can, you know, manage our own properties voluntarily, but we're really up against the fact that the state ordinances, or even the town of Swanzey with our culverts, for example, are they built properly? Are they sufficient? So it's like there's a lot of things that we don't have control over. And so as part of something like this, I'm sure you're doing this all over the state at all the lakes, but is New Hampshire Lakes getting anywhere with the state legislature toughening up some to protect the water quality?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say, well, short answer, yes. Particularly this year, this past legislative session at the state level, there were at least a dozen lake-related bills that went through the House, and a good chunk of them passed that had stalled in previous years. So this has been kind of an unprecedented year. I think that hopefully it just means that at the state level, they're just becoming more aware of some of these water quality issues that are impacting our lakes across the state, and starting to realize that we might need to tighten up some of the regulations. That said, though, it's wonderful to have things on the books, but it's another thing to enforce and regulate it. And so I think that that is the major issue right now at the state level and the town level, right? That there's just not enough resources to actually follow up and make sure that people are following these regulations. So unfortunately, it tends to become a tattling situation, right? Where a neighbor doesn't want to be in that position. You don't want to, you know, rat out your neighbors, but that tends to be how some of the, you know, the medium and bigger issues tend to be addressed. Is someone is on a lake and they see something that doesn't look right and they call the state, and the state's able to respond. But that's only if someone calls. More often than not, someone might see it but then carry on and not contact anyone. So that's the biggest issue, is enforcement. Yeah.
Was the changes and addition of the channel looked at in this whole process?
Sorry, the channel through the outlet and through the dam?
Yeah.
And did that change, you're asking if that changed with the storm?
I know, I was just curious because it's changed significantly over the last 30 years in closing a path of it and gradual condition where it's getting to where it's closing off because of all of the accumulation of sand and debris and all of that down there. Is that having an effect on what's going on with the condition of the lake?
Yeah, so obviously it's all interconnected, right? So obviously there's some sedimentation and infill that's starting to happen on that southern part of the lake, which is obviously where the lake is draining through and out through the dam. So yeah, it seems like over time you're starting to get a little bit more shallow in there, and certainly with last year's event. So, you know, I think that wasn't something that we did a intensive field of investigation for, but I think that certainly needs to be looked at in the future, having like a hydraulic engineer or a fluvial geomorphologist to look at the way that currents and water movement are occurring on the lake at you know throughout the year, and how that's moving sediment over time, and where there's opportunities for us to stabilize the shoreline and maybe some of the major watershed areas that are contributing to this infill, but then also the movement of sediment within the lake, you know, that's already there. Yeah, so obviously it's like we're just talking that it's already there, right? So the, you know, DES needs to see action that you've surveyed the area for alternative solutions, and also that you've identified all the sources that are contributing to that sedimentation. If down the road you were looking at possibly dredging that channel area to improve navigation. So that would be kind of a larger scale engineering effort. But it's not a direct recommendation that we had in the plan, but it's certainly something that I could add in as a recommendation.
Well, since it is a public waterway, I'd just be curious at what point does the state or the town step in when that waterway now becomes close to non-existent? Just curiosity.
Yeah, great question that I don't have a direct answer. Oh yeah, Kathy.
With regard to the New Hampshire lakes and the legislative session that just ended, 2 of the bills that specific to the lake that passed. One with regard to phosphorus use for lawn care, that passed and said that people selling fertilizer have to have signage that indicates this is water safe, this is not water safe. But again, it's up to the person educating themselves and what they're going to use in the laws. And the other is with regard to septic systems, that when a house that has waterfront, house on waterfront property is being sold, the septic system has to be evaluated. And if it's failing, it has to be repaired and replaced within 180 days at the expense of the seller. So that doesn't affect homes that aren't changing yet, but it's a step in the right direction. And maybe next year we can introduce more legislation.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. That's great. Yeah.
You mentioned in one of the slides that the lake changes every 1.5 times a year.
Yeah, it flushes out.
Right.
Yep.
Is that above average, below average?
Yeah, I would say that's probably about average. Yeah. You know, like for instance, especially any river impoundments that are lakes, they're flushing multiple times a year. Some of them even on a daily basis, obviously depending on their size. And then you have, it just depends on the watershed size compared to the volume of your lake, right? And how much it's actually pushing water out and flushing out. So some of your ones that have huge watersheds relative to their lake size, obviously they're flushing out more quickly. And then the smaller watersheds compared to lake area, It's just there's not enough water to push what's already in there. So then you're talking maybe every 2 years it gets flushed out. I think I worked on a lake that flushed every 5 years, which is a very long time. So in lake ecology.
This is
Yeah.
about the water testing, and maybe it's your dad. What is that current rhythm in water testing?
We water test 3 times a year.
3 times a year.
Yes.
And as far as water flushing out, does the deeper sections tend to be more stagnant, or does it kind of mix and flush, or is it just a surface level that's pushing volume through?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most of our lakes, including Swanzey Lake, is what we call a dimictic lake. Di meaning two, and mictic meaning mixing. So it mixes twice a year. So it's not mixing in the summertime. So in the summertime, you've got obviously warm air that's warming the surface of the water. And as you know, it gets colder, deeper down. Well, water physics, right? So warmer water stays on top, cooler water stays on bottom because it's denser. And when you create that temperature gradient, it takes a tremendous amount of energy to bring that cold water up and mix the lake. So what happens, you know, as we go into the fall, the air temperatures get cooler and cooler and cooler, and that starts to cool the surface layer so that it gets closer in temperature to the bottom, to the point where most likely in November you'll have what we call a fall turnover. So your entire lake will mix or turn over so that it mixes completely from top to bottom. And you'll see that when you do dissolved oxygen and temperature profiles. It'll go from, you know, a squiggly, you know, kind of S shape to just straight up and down. So the temperature at the top and the temperature at the bottom, and even the oxygen as well, will just be a straight line down because it's the same.
One more question.
Yeah.
So years ago, they would drop the lake roughly 3 or 4 feet,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't do that anymore. What was the reason for dropping it, and what's the reason for not doing it?
Yeah, so I guess off the top of my head, I can't answer the first question, but
You check that out.
No.
yeah, because obviously we drain. Oh, do you know?
It's requested by the lake residents to have a, leap year drawdown. Every 4 years, they count on a leap year drawdown. And I'm not certain why that was stopped, but I can't remember exactly when it was stopped.
Yeah. So
They used to also dredge the channel during that 4-year drop down. And it was also so that people, homeowners would have an opportunity to work on their shorelines.
yeah,
If long that.
I was just gonna say.
Stopped sometime in the late 70s.
Yeah, yeah. Usually, if it's on a regular basis, and if there's a particular, you know, a year where you're drawing it.
Fishing game was the one who put the stop to it because the fish were being drawn out. We had put up barriers, we had put up fencing and everything in front of the stop log bay below in the pond drain is way low, so we have to get that down to pull the stop logs out of that pond drain. And it was causing, you know, I guess it was causing erosion in the main part of the pond. Well, that was, all your entities don't always shake hands with each other. You have your thoughts, other parts of DES have their thoughts, and having been so long in this environment, I'm finding that not everybody has the same opinions, and not everybody can work together, so that's another reason why that is covered. So
Yeah. So most drawdowns are to give people opportunity to do any dock fixes or what have you. And you know, but one thing too, when you do have those extreme drawdowns, there is an ecological consequence to the littoral area, the shoreline area that's now exposed to the air, so it causes desiccation, and the micro ecosystem in those areas are really not able to to survive, and so that has ecological consequences down the road. So, yeah.
I had heard that that was the reason.
Right. It went on until
Okay.
at least early 2000s.
Yeah.
It was not
It
about
was
that.
been-
It wasn't only processing for that.
It had to do with habitat.
Right. And I remember very greatly, it was not.
I mean, it gets drawn down enough that you can do a dog
Right.
leg,
Okay.
but not damage any, habitat within the lake.
Yeah, it's still lower a
That's
little
great.
bit every year. When it was low this year, it was probably not like what they did with the
Right.
dam.
Yeah.
Their was a big drawdown. They had to repair the dam. Question for you. So a neighbor of mine has a thermometer in Idaho, but she told me, so this is secondhand information, that when she took the temperature of the lake, it was 85 degrees the other day. And so is that like, I've never jumped in the lake and felt that the water was warmer than the air like that. I think it was like crazy bad water. How is that obviously that has a negative impact, but how does that compare up to other lakes? Is everybody experiencing that?
Yeah, everybody. I was just in a lake last week, and obviously during this relentless heat wave that we've had, and thankfully it seems to have broken in the last day or two. But yeah, we also were seeing 85-degree water, and we tried to jump in the lake after our field work, and it was not refreshing. We didn't feel any better afterwards because it wasn't even bath water. It was almost like hot water, And so yeah, we're seeing that across the state, and I've been talking to a lot of my colleagues and people at DES and UNH because this is, as far back as our memories can go, a historic event with this like a relentless heat wave that's been warming our waters at a pretty rapid pace, especially at we had the heat wave in June and then a little break, and then these past 2 weeks, beginning of July, pretty early in the summer to be seeing such high temperatures, and not only high temperatures, but then how long it's lasted, and it's just no relief. Even at night, it wasn't cooling down enough. So we're still trying to figure out what that's going to mean ecologically for our lakes. We're obviously, I'm sure maybe most of you heard the news. I think it made national news with Lake Winnipesaukee and the number of blooms for the first, it was like a 3-day heat wave in June. That was historic and for the cyanobacteria blooms around that lake. And then people have been asking me, okay, now with this new heat wave that's lasting a longer period of time, why aren't we seeing them? We're still seeing cyanobacteria blooms, but it's not, crazy. And, I don't have a definitive answer for that, but one of the ideas that I've been spitballing with is every biological creature has an optimal temperature that they function at. Cyanobacteria tends to operate at a higher temperature than the rest of your algae, but they do have a limit, right? So it may be that it is too hot for them right now, and they're not able to proliferate. So there's always, that's just one factor. There's always a bunch of things that contribute, but we're still trying to work that out around the state. A lot of people are scratching their heads.
One of the statistics you gave us that really struck me was that 60% oxygen level at the base. How much do you think that was because of a point in time after the event? And how does that compare with other bodies of water? Is that way low, or is that in the range?
Yeah, so just so I understand your question, so the 60% oxygen following the, well, I don't remember that stat, but you're saying the low oxygen
Correct.
after the storm event.
Lower level, I believe you said 60%.
I was-
Jumped out at me, seemed very low, but I don't know.
Yeah, sorry, I maybe, I'm not sure where the 60% is coming from, but yeah, we were seeing lower oxygen right after that storm event. And so that's just because of all that new material that entered the lake, the organic material, it drives the oxygen demand from all the critters that are in the lake that want to eat up all that organic material. And so it drives down the oxygen because they need that to start decomposing all that organic
Did you have a
material.
meeting before the storm what the oxygen level was at the deepest part of the lakes? You know?
Yes.
Something you compare
Yeah.
the to?
Yep, we have profiles, and then obviously from previous years. It's just, it can be a little bit tricky because there's seasonal patterns in oxygen as well, right? So yes, we have a before storm, but we also have to kind of adjust our interpretation, knowing that the seasonal trends and then layer the storm event on top of that.
You can find online, you know, go to DES, you can see report oxygen levels, historic levels of oxygen, you know, like.
Yes, yep, all that data is through the state environmental monitoring database.
Yes.
It's also shown and graphed in the watershed management plan.
Every other year, immunology will come out and do an in-depth study, and they'll, you know, do the dissolved water, you know, on the skin and whatever. They test extensively. My water testing is just going 12 meters, 7 meters, and 2 meters, and drawing out samples and labeling them ready for. Then there's a combination of 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 meters. You switch it together and put it in a container. These are the things they look for with the sampling in the summertime. Was done by just Joe Blow-Weed on nothing, really. You know, I've been doing it for so long. But so.
Yeah, Jeff.
Joe Parisi has been doing dissolved oxygen readings. So if you want to contact him, he has a lot of up-to-date material. And if you contact Sarah Steiner in New Hampshire DES, she will tell you how to access all the testing that Ann has been doing is online.
It's great to do the dissolved oxygen, but that's very limited testing.
Yes, it's all about, but that was the best.
Yeah, no, it's,
He left.
So has that had an effect on the fish population then? Like, I know the state stocks our lake for the fishermen. We're a state-owned lake, and it's a fishing lake. They stock it with trout. And I haven't noticed, I used to get big, beautiful trout, like, spawning off our dock. I only had one circle. You could tell where they are when you make that circle.
Yeah.
This year. So I was just wondering if there's been any
There's
word
ton
for
down at my house.
the sun down here.
Lots of them.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna say, have people been fishing and noticed?
We call them trout circles. You know, you see the crop circles, we call them trout circles. They're all over the place.
I didn't have as many. Huh? Oh, I know it's the truck that makes them. I have no idea at all.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kite Appalachian, this is great. We have a big turnout. It looks like the majority of people are from Swanzey Lake. Thank you for coming. I'm not a public speaker, but 1,000 things go through my head on this presentation. One of them is, of many of these ideas, is I took a picture of the slide up there. You had, we are in a new era with enhanced effect on climate change. And then on the next slide, it says model results. This is great that we have all of this input. But if you look at it on a big chart, and you say, us as individuals only have a certain percentage of the phosphorus load, and you have other issues where you have watershed runoff and base load, you have internal loading, you have atmospheric dust, you have all of these other factors that on the grand picture are really the majority of the effect on the lake. Am I not understanding that correctly?
Right, so the watershed runoff source, that was the majority, I believe 56%. So at least 70% is coming from the developed portions of the watershed. So the forested areas, they do contribute small amounts of nutrients, but it's relatively minor. And generally, the rule of thumb is about 10 times the amount of phosphorus comes off of developed you know, if you have the same plot of land that's developed with a house and lawn and driveway, there's about 10 times more phosphorus coming off that individual plot on an annual basis than if you had a completely forested plot. So I think I understand where you're coming from, that it does seem like a huge problem, right? And it's like a little overwhelming at times, and you're right, a lot of that is out of our control, right? So the whole point of the watershed management plan is trying to focus on the things that we can control. What can we do on our individual properties and in the watershed to reduce that load? Because the things like cyanobacteria or the plants, right, they're feeding on that excess phosphorus. So if we can do our part to reduce our contribution to that, which is the majority of the phosphorus load.
Is it really the majority of the phosphorus load?
Yes.
Our part?
I 100%.
And is that, when you say that, is that in the watershed community?
That's what I think I'm trying, I understand what you're saying.
Right, I'm trying to look at the bigger picture here. It's all great to have all of these details and about, you know, fertilizer and so forth.
Well, so when you showed the map, you showed the lake, which is predominantly us people sitting in the room, but there's 435 acres in the watershed that are beyond us people that are sitting in this room. So I think if I understand what Kai's saying is they should be part of this conversation as well, because we're being affected by that whole 435 acres that are beyond us in other parts of Swansea. Is that what you're saying?
That's one example. I didn't look at it that way, but I'm just looking at the bigger picture.
I think that watershed, though, isn't most of that, when I think about upper right around the beaver pond, there's no development up there. That's logging, correct?
It's like,
Yeah.
So really, it's, you know, Pilgrim Pines, the campground, I think they're not represented here now. They're large stakeholders in this. And then there's those of us that own houses along the lake. The other development is maybe up Christian Hill. You've got a couple of houses up there. You've got, but for the most part, what I'm looking at is all forest. I don't know, going off to the right by the beaver, is that a road or is that a tributary? Because I don't know a road that goes over the beaver pond.
No,
That's a tributary that goes through the beaver pond.
Okay,
and then,
so, yeah.
Yeah, the color on.
And where we have the big runoff is that road off over to the right off of East Shore Road.
Talbot Hill.
That's Talbot Hill, and I don't know when the development starts. It's pretty undeveloped until you get up over the crest of the hill, is that correct? So that's sort of out of the watershed? So I think what I understand what you guys are saying, but I don't think there's a lot of people other than us right here that are development within the watershed. I guess.
but how much of what's off the, like if you take Christian Hill and all those roads beyond is being washed down in? I think that's
Right,
what
and
we're
that's
trying to understand.
That's a great point, but
That's where the
let's
challenge
just stop and put our thinking caps on.
Yep.
We sit here and we spend our resources, our dollars, when we have to upgrade something from a new septic system, we go to the town. They tell us exactly what the laws are and who we have to, pretty much how those laws have to be met. And we do that as good consumers, as good stewards of the lake. But now you have a flash flood like last year that comes, that's out of everybody's control. And then one of the slide, the new era. What is the impact of that new era compared to what we really do in the grand scheme of things by trying to be good citizens and follow these rules?
But once
Where are the resources really going? So when you sit there and say, what is very actionable, and not go for the low-hanging fruit and spend that resource and time and money and energy of FFB and all of these other government agencies to say, can we go after this?
are you saying
Which is the bigger fish to catch.
But Kai, what you're saying to me right now, what I'm hearing you say is, let's not bother fixing our septic tanks.
I'm not saying
Let's go ahead and fertilize our lawns.
No, I
Because
never stated that. We're doing that now.
Right, but there are people that may not. There are a lot of
And
places
you
on the
know,
lake.
as the years have gone on Swanzey Lake for the last 50 years, everybody's making improvements.
Right.
Look at it. Really look around the lake.
Right, which is-
Every improvement is upgraded because you're following the new rules.
So, you know, it's great that all the homeowners are good stewards, and we can contribute a certain percentage to the quality of the lake. My concern is, what is the state and what is the town gonna do, and how much can they contribute?
That's what I was trying to say.
That's
And
exactly.
that's-
Where does this
it's not- I
go
think that
beyond
sounds-
us?
Right, that's really where,
The
when you look,
If you want to know what the town is doing, you guys come to town. You come to town meeting.
I'm sure on one-
I have, and I will tell you, I have been fighting with the town of Swansea for 30 years for the changes in the channel. I've done a photo array of all the things, and the response I get from them is, we're not interested.
Alibi, that's really good. So the question is, how can we organize as a Swanzey Lake Protective Association and all the homeowners to keep coming to these meetings? Because when Bud and I went to try to get $5 grand for some testing, they were like, we don't see the investment in that. You have to say there's $100,000 for big deals. So we need to organize and work as the association. So come to the Swanzey Protective Association meetings and we can talk how to do this.
I agree with that, because one of the things that I think is really, really important is the town, not just the town administration, the entire town, the residents of Swansea come and use our lake on day pass. They go to the town beach. You know, we have a guy who's doing, you know, donuts in front of the Blanchards and everybody else's house in the water, one of the jet ski kind of things, that he shouldn't be, and we have no enforcement. We have no enforcement, you know, apparently it's legal, it's a watercraft. So it's like we have no control over the lake. It's a state-owned lake, we live in a town. I just read the newsletter and there wasn't one word about the SPLA or Swanzey Lake and this wonderful project you guys have done. They had all sorts of things about the fire, the, you know, police chief, what the school district is doing. We need to be represented in the town's ethos, you know, they need to understand that. We've got a Swanzey Lake Protection Association, and it's not just for homeowners, it should be for every single person that uses the lake in Swansea. They should care about the water quality. It's their town, their children are swimming at summer camp right now, every day. They should care.
So let's just say, come to the next meeting and let these guys finish their presentation.
and when is the next meeting?
I don't know, send it out.
Oh, one more request, this is a good request. If you guys encapsulated all of your recommendations for us homeowners as to best practices, I'm sure it's there, I'm sure New Hampshire Lakes has something, go ahead and do something. And I think we've received it before, but I can't, my email, get it. But what I was gonna say is contractors. A lot of times people as homeowners are hiring other people, other landscapers, other people to do the work on their land. It would be great to be able to hand your contractor something and say, stop using Scott's fertilizer on that gorgeous lawn and use whatever Bud is gonna recommend. You know, maybe Bud can, when he does his presentation, we can get an email with a link to how to buy it and where to buy it. You know, what is the product you're recommending? Let's make it as easy as possible. Yeah, I think that would be great.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you all so much for your questions, and thank you so much for your attention.
No, that's why the town says, you know,